Hello everyone. Today we are going to talk about the relationship between artist and politics through the eyes of one of the greatest thinkers of the 20th century, Virginia Woolf. As we all know that Woolf is best known as a novelist, two of her novels have reached the curriculums of various educational boards, namely Mrs. Dalloway and To the Lighthouse. But we are not going to discuss her novels today. Most of us readers are enraptured by her aesthetics in the novels. Like, for example, To the Lighthouse is an epic. It is neatly divided into three sections and follows all the rules that an epic requires: the beginning, the middle, and the end. And she might have gone on as a novelist without much interference on her part into politics if the events of the 20th century had not taken the turn that they took. And thankfully, fortune placed her right in the thick of the events of the 20th century, because now we can see with reason why no artist is detached from the political events surrounding him or her. In today's world, where war is engulfing one region after the other, the fires are engulfing one region after the other, the tragedies are engulfing one region after the other, the artists have a lot to learn from Woolf's writings. We are going to see what role an artist should play in the times of political crisis, but for that we need to understand the social background of the essay that she wrote entitled Artist and Politics in 1936. So in 1936, what was happening around Woolf? Hitler had found a way to breach the terms of the Treaty of Versailles, which John Maynard Keynes called a suicide pact for Europe when it was signed. The Rhineland was considered as a demilitarized zone according to the treaty. So Hitler decided to militarize it by sending his forces in that region. He did it deliberately to rouse anger amongst the Allies, and furthermore, to ensure that his message got across as clearly as possible, he increased German military presence close to the French border as well. In the same year, Berlin hosted the Summer Olympics, which is now known as the first televised sport event. So, the whole world was closely watching what was happening in Germany, not just sport wise, but also politically. While across the Atlantic, Theodore Roosevelt had been re elected for his second term in a landslide victory against Alf Landon in the United States, whose citizens were still questioning their participation in the European political arena. There were three camps at that time in the United States. Firstly, there were those who said that they had nothing to do with the events of a faraway land. They came to be known as isolationists, and they continue to dominate the American political rhetoric even today. Secondly, there were some who said that even if it requires military action, they should directly get involved on the European continent. And thirdly, there were those who said that America should get involved in European politics, but only diplomatically. Let's come back to the other side of the Atlantic. In England, George V had died, who is also mentioned in Woolf's diary entries of January 1936, and Edward VIII ascended to the throne. By the end of the year, England would see its third king in a year, when Edward VIII would abdicate. Now let's also visit Spain in 1936. In July 1936, two generals, Emilio Mola and Francisco Franco, had had enough of democracy in Spain, so they decided to overthrow the Democratic Republic of Spain and paved the way for Hitler and Mussolini in the following year to intervene militarily to help their dictator friend Franco. The world was spinning too fast in 1936, and the center of attention were political figures. It was impossible to keep oneself away from the turning and twisting of the political world at that time. Woolf was in the process of writing her longest novel, The Heirs, during this time, which in the end occupied so much her time and energy that she termed it as her vomit on paper. It was published finally in 1937. But the political current in her writings had already started to build up during these years, which can be seen in the essay Artist and Politics, and also by the fact that just after publishing the Heirs, she published Three Guineas in 1938, which can be considered her political treatise on women's rights. Such was the turbulent year of 1936. But history was about to show its worst face in the coming years, and Woolf could feel the conflict in society within herself. Now let's turn to the essay and ask her why did she choose to write this essay. She begins her essay thus. Quote open. I have been asked by the Artists International Association to explain as shortly as I can why it is that the artist at present is interested actively and genuinely in politics. For it seems that there are some people to whom this interest is suspect. Quote close. The Artists International Association was founded in London in 1933 with the sole aim of protecting Republican values. It organized moving exhibitions, murals, and other forms of art to get across its message. In the Spanish Civil War, it sided with the Republican Party against Franco. Its motivation was clearly different from the other art movements that considered art for art's sake as the correct approach for art. As can be seen from its works throughout the years, the society was active until 1971 that it considered art to be for politics' sake. This objective was obviously attacked at that time and is still often under harsh criticism. But as Woolf explains plainly, the motivation for writing this essay, that why should the artist be interested and not just interested, but also actively involved in politics, needs some justification, and she will provide them. And not just provide the justification, but also shut its critics for good. The reasons that she will give can help us realize why is it that art today, whether it be digital art or any other form, should be dedicated to voicing political concerns that define humanity. The upcoming years of this century do not look any better than the previous century, and all artists need to buckle up for the worst to come. Let's listen to Woolf. What does she have to say following this introduction? Because hardly do we see her getting this animated in writings pre-1935. She continues, quote open, that the writer is interested in politics needs no saying. Every publisher's list, almost every book that is now issued, brings proof of the fact. The historian today is writing not about Greece and Rome in the past, but about Germany and Spain in the present. The biographer is writing lives of Hitler and Mussolini, not of Henry VIII and Charles Lamb. The poet introduces communism and fascism into his lyrics. The novelist turns from the private lives of his characters to their social surroundings and their political opinions. Obviously, the writer is in such close touch with human life that any agitation in his subject matter must change his angle of vision. Either he focuses his sight upon the immediate problem, or he brings his subject matter into relation with the present. Or in some cases, so paralyzed is he by the agitations of the moment that he remains silent. Quote close. If the publishers are demanding books that are politically relevant through and through, then does not it mean that the public is deeply interested in these topics? What is the best way of gauging the reading interest of a certain society? For example, if you visit any country, usually we land in one of the major cities, the capital city usually. Let's say Baku, Azerbaijan. Again, this example is just for the purpose of clarification. We can equally give examples of London, Rome, or Paris here. So, you land in Baku and you want to know what is the demand of the reading public in this city. You want to know with what food for thought the intellectuals are feeding themselves. All you need to do is visit the major bookstores of Baku and closely scan the books on shelves there. If you are interested in knowing the political mind of the city, or better put, if you want to know what the government and the publishers think the public want to read, then go to the section of politics and scan closely the books there. And this is not just in the politics section that you will find books like this, but other sections also are decided by the government and the publishers. Obviously, it is well said and well repeated that never judge the book by its cover, but what people do not tell us is that the book covers at least tell us what is at offer for the public to read. Publishing industry is a two-way street. Not only does it betray what the public demands, it also creates the public demand. If you want to read about politics and history, then you are going to read most probably the books that are easily accessible in the bookstores of your country. Now we have a disruptive market of online bookstores from where you can pick and choose the book you want exactly to read. But usually for a novice who is generally interested in a topic and just starting his or her reading journey, the bookstores are the easiest to access. Therefore, for the major part, it is the physical bookstores that are still relevant in creating the intellectual capital of a citizen body. As Woolf explains that in 1936, there were only books about Hitler and Mussolini that were on offer, and they were printing it in tons. In fact, even today, almost every history shelf has a book on Nazi Germany or Franco's Spain. So the interest has not died out. It has, if not increased, then at least sustained amongst the reading public. The writer of fiction is forced at times by the publisher, it seems, to become a writer of non-fiction because, quite frankly, one should write what sells. Then furthermore, what comes later in this explanation is even more important. The question that must concern the reader and the writer alike is, from where does the writer get his or her subject matter? The answer is quite simply from the society that surrounds the writer. Even the language used in the book is decided by the society in which the writer lives. To understand this, we can consider a general example of a person who has always lived in a French household, and all his life he has only heard, spoken, read, and written French. If one day he would decide to become a writer, in what language are we expecting him to write the book if not French? We hardly consider the language as the subject matter of the book, but Kolakowski did stress upon this point in Marxist vein that when even our language is chosen by the society in which we are born, then it is no surprise that our thought content is also shaped by the society we live in. This is precisely the point that Woolf wants to clarify, that politics is the art of organizing society. When it is in disorder, when we would have a bloodthirsty fight between democratic and autocratic values in our societies, then the society would be in disorder. And if the society is in disorder, then no wonder that the artist will tear out his subjects from this disorder, which by default would seem a political move. Even in the case of art for art's sake, the interpretation of the subject matter would be politically motivated, if not by the artist, then at least by the observer. Every subject matter presented in art is connected with the moment and place in which it is conceptualized. To further elaborate this relationship, Woolf asks these questions. Quote open. But why should this agitation affect the painter and the sculptor? It may be asked. He is not concerned with the feelings of his model, but with its form. The rose and the apple have no political views. Why should he not spend his time contemplating them, as he has always done in the cold north light that still falls through his studio window? Quote close. These questions are directed at the fact that if the artist has learned his art from Vermeer or Rembrandt, focusing on the aesthetics of the paintings, let's extend it to the writer. If a writer has learned his art from the natural aesthetics of Wordsworth, why not stick to that? The question seems valid on the first look. The apple and rose are red. Then why make it le rouge et le noir of Stendhal? Let's listen to her response. Quote open. To answer this question shortly is not easy. For to understand why the artist, the plastic artist, is affected by the state of society, we must try to define the relations of the artist to society. And this is difficult, partly because no such definition has ever been made. But there is some sort of understanding between them. Most people would agree. And in times of peace, it may be said roughly to run as follows. The artist on his side held that since the value of his work depended upon freedom of mind, security of person, and immunity from practical affairs, for to mix art with politics he held was to adulterate it, he was absolved from political duties, sacrificed many of the privileges that the active citizen enjoyed, and in turn created what is called a work of art. Society on its side bound itself to run the state in such a manner that it paid the artist a living wage, asked no active help from him, and considered itself repaid by those works of art which have always formed one of its chief claims to distinction. Quote close. We are reminded of good old days here, the peaceful days of Keats, Wordsworth, Vermeer, and Constable, where the sky was the object good enough to contemplate, where the sweet voice of Nightingale was enough to invigorate a tone of harmony in us, where the soft voice of the running brook would generate ideas, where a girl with a pearl earring was a subject so encapsulating that her eyes still continue to daunt us with beautiful misery. Those were the days, as Woolf claims, where the artist was well paid by society. Obviously, not well paid in the sense of money, but enough to fill the stomach at night and leave an everlasting legacy even at 25. For Keats sadly passed away at the young age of 25. That was the time when society did its due, and natural misery, not political misery, was the only obstruction to the pacific expression of art. To ensure her justification, Woolf provides some thought provoking hypotheses. She continues, quote open, with many lapses and breaches on both sides, the contract has been kept. Society has accepted the artist's work in lieu of other services, and the artist, living for the most part precariously on a pittance, has written or painted without regard for the political agitations of the moment. Thus, it would be impossible when we read Keats or look at the pictures of Titian and Velázquez or listen to the music of Mozart or Bach to say what was the political condition of the age or the country in which these works were created. And if it were otherwise, if the Ode to a Nightingale were inspired by hatred of Germany, if Bacchus and Ariadne symbolized the conquest of Abyssinia, if Figaro expounded the doctrines of Hitler, we should feel cheated and imposed upon, as if, instead of bread made with flour, we were given bread made with plaster. Quote close. The subject matters of Ode to a Nightingale, Bacchus and Ariadne, and Figaro themselves betray the communion between the artists, their productions, and the society they lived in. Even if the society was mismanaged economically, that is to say that the artists did not get the correct monetary value of their works, they were yet compensated by the political harmony by large. At least this is her thesis. There was a harmony between the society and the artist, or more properly said, a kind of silent communion between artist and politics. But then what happened? Read further what came to pass since and how this harmony was destructed in the 20th century. Woolf continues, quote open, but if it is true that some such contract existed between the artist and society in times of peace, it by no means follows that the artist is independent of society. Materially, of course, he depends upon it for his bread and butter. Art is the first luxury to be discarded in times of stress. The artist is the first of the workers to suffer. But intellectually also he depends upon society. Society is not only his paymaster, but his patron. If the patron becomes too busy or too distracted to exercise his critical faculty, the artist will work in a vacuum and his art will suffer and perhaps perish from lack of understanding. Again, if the patron is neither poor nor indifferent but dictatorial, if he will only buy pictures that flatter his vanity or serve his politics, then again the artist is impeded and his work becomes worthless. And even if there are some artists who can afford to disregard the patron, either because they have private means or have learned in the course of time to form their own style and to depend upon tradition, these are for the most part only the older artists whose work is already done. Even they, however, are by no means immune. Quote close. The line that the artists, the politicians, and the society at large, which include us readers, should keep in mind is society is not only his paymaster but his patron. In times of peace, the relation between artist and politics seems different than in times of war. Again, I stress, as Woolf stresses, it seems different. The hideous actions of politicians could be hidden if somehow the social conflict is contained. But it does not negate the thesis that the artist works in a vacuum when he paints his boots. Van Gogh is one example. When reading art, it equally applies to reading books. We must look through the canvas into the economic and political conditions under which the art was produced. Van Gogh may paint a beautiful scenery where the harvest is gathered by workers on the field. We marvel at the colors of the sky. We marvel at his representation of the hay. We marvel at the details of the laces. But what we often forget when looking at Van Gogh is the turmoil that did not let his self rest in peace. We do often forget the sand dunes that have become the part of his canvas while he was painting in storms. We often forget the raindrops that colored his canvas as he worked through them. When we read his letters, we get to know that he knew how to beautify suffering. The suffering of the coal miners, which is a political subject. The suffering of the potato eaters, which is again a political subject. The agony with which the old man bends over his knees. It is also a political subject. After reading Woolf, you would never be able to see beauty without suffering. In times of peace, many a politician hire artists for propaganda. Before they used to appear on canvas, now they appear on television in the name of journalists. In peacetime, this silent agreement between artist and politics functions so well that all the criticisms are put to bed because the reader or the observer is under the sweet spell of an illusory belief that everything is fine. But only in times of conflict, in times of crisis, in times of war, does it become clear that every subject matter, no matter how beautifully painted or written, is politically relevant. The curtain of illusion is shed to pieces because the social contract between artist and politics is disturbed, because those who are responsible for organizing society have gone mad. It is in these moments of distress the true spirit of artist cannot remain silent. His sensibility towards humanity, his acute observation does not let him stay in peace. Woolf does not let her pen lie regarding this disharmony as she further expands upon this subject and wakes up the artist in us with these words. Quote open. For though it would be easy to stress the point absurdly, still it is a fact that the practice of art, far from making the artist out of touch with his kind, rather increases his sensibility. It breeds in him a feeling for the passions and needs of mankind in the mass which the citizen whose duty it is to work for a particular country or for a particular party has no time and perhaps no need to cultivate. Thus, even if he be ineffective, he is by no means apathetic. Perhaps indeed he suffers more than the active citizen because he has no obvious duty to discharge. Quote close. An artist is an artist precisely because he feels more, sees more, listens more, and consequently suffers more. How many times have we seen flowers in our lives? But read the classic first line of Mrs. Dalloway, in which Woolf writes, Mrs. Dalloway said she would buy the flowers herself. You will never be able to look at flowers the same way again. And furthermore, follow through her train of thought and her observation of flowers throughout the novel. They remind you of Monk's house, in which Woolf and Leonard kept a big garden that the latter tended daily. Woolf had a separate writing room at Monk's house, and the path to that room is even today strewn with flowers. And just beside her writing room, one can see the large cemetery of the church, separated by a low wall. Flowers and death are ever present in her novels. The same kind of observation was made by Coleridge when he said that how many of us How many times have seen snow in our lives? But once we read the description of snow in the poems of Burns, we would never be able to see the snow the same way again. What is it in these artistic descriptions that make them so poignant? It is precisely this extra sensual, intuitive harmony that the artist feels with everything around him. How is it possible that the very earth that had fed him all through his life, his country, is in turmoil and he feels no relation to it? Now, even the question of the relationship between artist and politics seems moot. There is no art without suffering. Even when everyone is roaming around in the world without a care about their fellow beings, the artist has his eyes set upon the dark part of the society, the part that keeps us human, all too human. And when the society is in stress, look at how Woolf paints the pain that artists go through. She writes, quote open, for such reasons, then it is clear that the artist is affected as powerfully as other citizens when society is in chaos. Although the disturbance affects him in different ways, his studio now is far from being a cloistered spot where he can contemplate his model or his apple in peace. It is besieged by voices, all disturbing, some for one reason, some for another. First, there is the voice which cries, I cannot protect you. I cannot pay you. I am so tortured and distracted that I can no longer enjoy your works of art. Then there is the voice which asks for help. Come down from your ivory tower, leave your studio, it cries, and use your gifts as doctor, as teacher, not as artist. Again, there is the voice which warns the artist that unless he can show good cause why art benefits the state, he will be made to help it actively by making aeroplanes, by firing guns. And finally, there is the voice which many artists in other countries have already heard and had to obey. The voice which proclaims that the artist is the servant of the politician. You shall not practice your art, it says, at our bidding. Paint us pictures, carve us statues that glorify our gospels. Celebrate fascism, celebrate communism. Preach what we bid you preach. On no other terms shall you exist. Quote close. In times of crisis, the artist does not need to prove his or her worth to society. The society itself betrays the necessity of the artist. Some even try to convince the artist of changing the profession and become quote unquote more productive by making engines for planes and batteries for tanks. Some from the ruling class invade the privacy of the artist and force him or her to become a propagandist. But the artist is much smarter than these warmongers. There is a reason why Schrödinger almost regretted being a physicist at the end of his life and turned more towards biology. He saw the consequence of physics in the form of the devastation of the atomic bomb. If artists have anything to regret, it is only his own inability to not have done enough in his or her own profession. And perhaps the other common regret about which no artist can do much is why did not the others listen to him or her before? I leave you with the last words of the essays that must reinvigorate in us the worth and passion of art. Woolf concludes, quote open, with all these voices crying and conflicting in his ears, how can the artist still remain at peace in his studio, contemplating his model or his apple in the cold light that comes through the studio window? He is forced to take part in politics. He must form himself into societies like the Artists' International Association. Two causes of supreme importance to him are in peril. The first is his own survival, the other is the survival of his art. Quote close. Thank you, everyone.